Right. Okay. Welcome everyone this evening to this evening's debate. This House would re-elect Donald Trump. So we move to the opening proposition speaker, which is Gavin McKenzie. So Gavin, will set the timer when you're ready.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. It's great to open this debate, which is probably likely to be a very contentious debate tonight. I don't want to say too much on defining the issue. I think that the motion is pretty clear. This House would re-elect Donald Trump, so the proposition would naturally want that to happen, and the opposition would naturally not want that to happen. That seems fairly self-explanatory. I think we're faced with a choice between two candidates in this election, and I think the candidates we're faced with, I have to say as a disclaimer before I get into my argument, are of a low quality, both of them, I would say. But however, saying that, when you look at the way in which the Democratic Party have selected their candidate, Joe Biden, for selection and election in this presidential election, I mean, it's beggars belief. It's almost like they haven't learned anything from the past 4 years, right? I mean, you've got Trump here. He's been elected in 2016. Biden and Harris as a ticket, they are so far apart when it comes to issues. You have Kamala Harris, who was questioned, I think, a couple of days ago. And she was questioned by an interviewer who said that, well, look, aren't you one of the most liberal senators, the most liberal Congress people in the American Congress right now? And she wasn't unable to respond to it. So when you vote for Joe Biden in this election, you're not just getting Joe Biden and his sort of establishment politics. You're actually getting the far left of the Democratic Party, which, perhaps, maybe in this room tonight, we might want that, some of us, but quite frankly, the American people won't want that, and I doubt that they will vote for it. And we're forgetting something. The reason Trump won is because Americans feel that he represents them, precisely because he isn't a politician. I mean, he regularly takes on the business people, the journalists, the establishment, as he calls it, and he does that quite effectively. I mean, he's not afraid to go down to the dirt and to tell, CNN or ABC News what he thinks of him. And quite frankly, I think a lot of Americans like that. Perhaps it's not the best trait for a politician to be like Blair or Brown or Cameron in this country, but it's maybe something that people want. And I think it's something that people are going to vote for next Tuesday. I mean, I think you've got to look at the polling as well. Now, the polling for Trump hasn't been particularly great when you look at it on a national scale. But then 4 years ago, we had this same argument as well, that the national polling looked like it was going to be a sweep for Hillary Clinton. And of course, that wasn't the case. The problem is that we have these very contentious battles which are going to take place in your swing states. The swing states is where it's going to matter. And what we've seen in the last debate, in the second debate of the presidential round, was Joe Biden committed to having to cutting federal subsidies or stopping federal subsidies on oil. Now, that's something that the American people are just not going to buy, especially in these swing states where their jobs, their economy, it relies on these energy industries. Trump committed in that debate, and you can watch it, you can go back and watch it, to renewables and to invest in oil as well. That's something that people want to see. You also have to question Biden himself. I think Biden is a very weak candidate. And I think Kamala, less so. But when you look at what's going to happen, if Biden gets elected, he's going to be the one making the big foreign policy speeches. If that happens, do you really think he's going to stand up to Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin? I don't think he will. Now, you can say a lot about Donald Trump, but he has a lot of energy, and he takes that energy into his role as a foreign policy political actor. He has successfully negotiated with Kim Jong-un, which no president had done before. Now, nothing came out of that negotiation, right? But the fact is, to get Kim Jong-un sitting down with Donald Trump, the most powerful person in the world, it de-escalated the situation, right? It stopped the situation dead in its tracks. And that's Trump as an effective foreign policy person. You can argue about his domestic record all day, but, us, we're sitting in the UK and Scotland. When we think of a US president, we need to think about the foreign policy initiatives that they're going to take, rather than what they do domestically, which doesn't really matter to us and doesn't really affect us in the United Kingdom, I don't feel. Finally, I want to say briefly about Black Lives Matter. because it's such an important issue. I think the liberal left in America have lost confidence, or will begin to lose confidence as a result of Black Lives Matter. I think in democratic-run cities, if you're a small and medium business owner, you just don't want to vote for a candidate like Donald Trump, like Joe Biden, because Joe Biden fundamentally doesn't represent you. He will let people in that you don't want. But I beg you to vote for the motion for the reasons I have stated. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gavin, for the opening speech of the night. Now we move to the opposition side of the argument, when Dasha is up first. So Dasha, we'll give you 5 minutes when you're ready.
Okay, thank you for the floor. So, best thing about my speech will be the fact that it can be fact-checked, unlike most of the things that have been said by Trump, and it also will start like every single email currently. We live in uncertain, challenging times. Each month makes Black Mirror look like a utopia. The one thing the whole world, and the US specifically, does not need in these times is a president who spent the past 4 years in the White House belittling minorities, leaving crucial international treaties, threatening war, and live tweeting for Fox News. This side of the House is for human rights. This side is for basic human decency. So my speech will have 3 main points. 2, because I will most likely not be able to talk about COVID. So first is the international cooperation points, because the current situation in the world demands international cooperation, and Trump is working hard to destroy it. Second point will be the human decency point. He hurt too many minority groups and discredits the suffering of too many others. But first, really short rebuttal. Far left of the party, it is a part of Trump's propaganda, making everything about socialism. I would argue that US doesn't know what communism or socialism is, and it is said by a person who is half Russian, half Ukrainian. Second is Trump has energy, and thus his foreign policy is good. His North Korean talks and the deal that came out of it is not only incredibly questionable and unclear because the information was not disclosed, it also caused a lot of negative responses from the international community because of these points. So I don't see, and it ties into my first point. So some current challenges, except COVID, that we are facing in the society are the police brutality in multiple countries, the climate change issues, the terrorist threats that never went away, and the immigration crisis caused by all of the above and some of them. Trump, as a president, causes threat to international peace and international order. Some of the treaties Trump pulled out of are, for example, Nuclear Forces Treaty, which he had with Russia, which is a rising threat for both Europe and Central Asia, as we can see in its conflicts against Ukraine, against Georgia, and the heightening of the conflict in the Nagorno-Karabakh region. Second is the Paris Agreement, which is an ecology deal for those who don't know. Trump pulled out of it, although US is the second biggest contributor to the pollution in the world. Third, UN Human Rights Council that Trump pulled out of because he cannot deal with criticism. You know why? Because people told him in the United Nations that it is not good to support Israel, which is killing many people, and it is also not a good idea to put Mexicans in concentration camps and build a wall. He couldn't deal with that, so he decided to pull out of the Human Rights Council. His motivations for all of these are his alt-right leaning America First campaign, on which he won his election, in which he accused every single country for not contributing enough to the international society and being too burdensome for the US. And because of that, the US does not need to participate in all of these international treaties. It is not required for them because they are already doing way too much, so let's just pull out. However, information for him, unfortunately, this is how international law works. International treaties are very rarely convenient for every single party in equal manners. They are very rarely perfect and are profitable for all of the parties involved. This is how it works. This is how it has worked ever since the Cold War. Oh my God. So Trump's actions undermine decades of work by international community trying to ensure there will be no World War III through those international treaties. Second point, really fast. Some of the executive orders Trump has signed were Affordable Care Act repealment, which he has not replaced as anything, Muslim ban, pipeline orders, as well as Federal Workers Act very recently, which provides him with power to replace every person in the office with whom he doesn't agree with. He is not the president of the people. He is an entitled millionaire who likes making headlines. There are issues like the Black Lives Matter movement and police brutality. There is the Mexican border movement, trans rights issues, abortion issues. What he failed to do in his 4 years is enforce firearms regulations, which would protect people from getting killed in his country, or in any form or way condemn the actions of the police. And instead, he condemned the protesters who were saying that, hey, look, we are being killed because of your white supremacist alt-right position. So he is racist, ableist, sexist, homophobic, and he has made multiple actions and speeches regarding that. He's not a person of the people of the US, and we should not elect him. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Dasha, for the first opposition speech of the night. Now we move back to proposition with Adam. Yes, Adam, you're here. So we'll set the timer when you're ready.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I hope you can all hear me and see me well enough. Right, so from across the other side of the Atlantic, this upcoming US presidential election may seem like a bit of a shoo-in for Vice President Biden. However, I propose that we look at the record of Donald J. Trump, which suggests, as more recent polls show, that it will be a much closer race. Now, in general terms, when we're selecting a president, we might look to key considerations such as their record in office, their policies, and their manner. And as far as his record in office is concerned, Donald J. Trump has been the most successful president since Teddy Roosevelt. And it stands in stark contrast to the administration of Joe Biden's BFF, Barack Obama, who in 8 years achieved frankly nothing, ruled by executive order, and managed to destroy the lives of more innocent civilians in the Middle East than George Bush and Tony Blair combined. In contrast, Donald Trump has been the president of peace, withdrawing US troops from war-torn regions in Iraq and Afghanistan, the first sitting US president in history to meet with the leader of North Korea, and of course the recent landmark peace deal with Israel and the Gulf nations. And whilst we're talking of foreign policy, he's also pulled the US out of the disastrous JCPOA, which only allowed Iran to continue the proliferation of nuclear weapons and pose itself as a threat to the West. Most importantly, however, is that Donald Trump has stood up to China, which is the biggest threat to Western civilization since the fall of the Berlin Wall. As former Prime Minister of Australia, Tony Abbott, said, the rise of China has been fueled by greed and fear. But Donald Trump and the Donald Trump administration has stood up against this. He stood up against this vile, oppressive, autocratic demagoguery that characterizes the CCP's rule. Voting for Joe Biden will merely return us to the Obama age of drone killings, US military intervention in foreign wars, and complacency on China. Now, turning attentions towards domestic policy, however, Donald Trump's plan on the economy has been, well, the figures show, the most successful in US history. Unemployment at record lows, stock market at record highs. Trump has shown that capitalism and the free market is the way. Tax cuts for hardworking Americans and for profit-making, booming businesses, which brings benefits to the entire US economy and to the entire US populace. The socialist policies of the Democrats will only drag down the US economy and put jobs and livelihoods at risk. This time last week, when Gavin already alluded to it, Joe Biden stood up at the podium in Nashville, Tennessee, and couldn't say whether he was in favor of the oil industry or not. He couldn't say whether he supported the continued use of fracking or not. He has surprisingly little to say about oil and natural gas and coal, industries which support US jobs in the economy and which have the support of Donald J. Trump. It's no surprise, really, when the co-chair of his climate task forces, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the Marxist of Manhattan, the Democrats have now become the party of socialism as they bowed their heads to AOC and her cabal, not to mention Antifa. And with this, a word on the BLM riots tearing up America. The fight against racism used to mean Martin Luther King, peaceful protests, winning the argument on logic and decency. but at present it manifests itself in the form of riots, taking the knee, toppling of statutes, and general thuggery. Joe Biden has no answers to American businesses being burnt to the ground, to violence on the streets, to attacks on law enforcement, other than to keep quiet and hide in his basement. Donald Trump has been there to restore law and order. You cannot tackle racism in America by being run by a reactionary government guided by vigilantes. You do it through investment in socially and economically deprived areas, creating more jobs, education, not re-education. With black people and employment in the US at its highest level than ever before, Donald Trump has done more than any president since Abraham Lincoln for African Americans. It's true. Now ask yourself, what did Obama do? How did things change exactly? And what more do you expect from the aged, senile career politician like Joe Biden, who, if elected in November, would be out of office quicker than William Henry Harrison, only to make way for one of the least successful candidates in the primaries last year, even amongst Democrats? Vote Biden, get Kamala. Vote Trump, get 4 more years of economic growth, law and order, and improvement in the lives of everyday Americans. And with that, I say, hail to the chief, long live the cause of freedom, and let's keep America great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adam, for that speech. Now we move back onto the side of opposition with Maxwell. Right, so we'll set a time of when you're ready.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I will bring you 3 points. I'll talk about the protest and how Trump has made everything worse there. I'll talk about the fact he's creating a cult of personality and how this is like a bad thing. And I'll talk about how that leads to nationalist violence. So let's get this going. Firstly, the protests. The protests aren't going to go away under Biden. This is just a fact. There's too many systematic problems underlying them. But what has Trump done for the protests? Well, what has Trump done? He's called for nationalist militias to stand by. He's gotten secret police up to kidnap people in the streets, which I think all of its own is bad. But like ultimately, you have to sit and so there was violence, but you can't directly link that to Trump. I'll do that later. And there was like the fact that the kidnapping eventually stopped. But I'm going to tell you why this is worse when he gets re-elected. For that, I have 2 points. Firstly and foremostly, we think you shouldn't be setting secret police on people who are fairly peacefully protesting the fact that they're getting killed in the streets. This is just objectively wrong, and all of the police violence and nationalist violence that Trump has encouraged by refusing to condemn any of this is in fact a bad all on its own, and is a reason why you should condemn him as president. Biden at least would make lip service. He would encourage nationalist violence, and he would have secret police kidnapping people who are peacefully protesting. But secondly, is if he gets another term, he's going to have a lot more political power. Why? 2 reasons. Well, firstly, the fact that he's elected in the first place means that he's popular support, and he can probably do a lot of things in his first part in office because he is an absolute democratic mandate. Secondly, is he will have control of the courts. Well, basically this means is that he doesn't have to pull out his secret police anymore. He doesn't have to go, well, shit, people are angry at me and not do the secret police because the Supreme Court will buy it because he's packing it full of Republicans, and he'll have the political power to do so. And I think having, this means we're going to have secret police. That's really quite fascist. Is probably just a general bad thing that we really shouldn't support with any president. And I think just definitely that letting Trump be re-elected will do this. The protest will continue. He will escalate things because he has the power to do so. And I think this is bad. I think George made a POI.
Yes. Coming back to Biden, you said that he'll be able to do all the things he wants in his first term. He'll be able to have massive popular support. Do side op believe, therefore, that this is resting on the fact they'll split the Senate?
I literally did not talk about Biden apart from the fact that he might not be able to solve the record either. I talked about how the fact is that Trump is probably going to get enough popular support to pass things. He hasn't exactly had complete control over the institutions right now. He uses the executive order. People are less likely to question him after he just won an election, and therefore he's going to be able to kidnap people. Why is Trump starting a cult of personality? Okay, so cult of personality stuff is what happens when you have somebody who creates an image of themselves as the perfect leader. We think it's an example of that is, for example, when Putin was riding the horse. That is an example of somebody showing themselves to be I am the peak of physical fitness. I am the perfect man. Cult of personalities exist so that they get people to back you regardless of anything. That they absorb all the media about you that says, I'm perfect, I'm great. And why do we, and 4 things we think he's been doing to do that. He's been faking his health. He is faked, we have a fake medical record that says he's in perfect health, despite the fact he's obviously obese. He's obviously old. He's probably quite ill. We think like this is an example of him showing the supposed perfect, like physical perfection that is necessary for a cult of personality. He also called himself a very stable genius. He also spun his COVID diagnosis to show how strong he is. These are all indicative of a cult of personality. These are all indicative of the idea of personal superiority. Next, he emphasizes Christianity. You know the example of him tear gassing protesters outside the White House to get a photo op with the church. We think this is a really popular thing in America, especially by evangelical Christians. So he's showing himself to be perfect on another front. He's this pious man, supposedly. I'll tell you why people are going to buy this later once I've gone through next. Thirdly, he drops the dog whistles. He is overtly racist. This is good for the white nationalists because people start, like, it's been quite apparent that people aren't going to do the white nationalist stuff anymore with the Republicans. So now there's this guy who's like, yes, I believe this, I back this. This is like a good thing for me. So they're going to they're going to be happy with him. Fourth, American ideals of rich people are good. You can't do that, Adam. Rich people are great. He emphasizes how rich he is, how perfect he is. All this means is you have a cult of personality that because you only see Fox stuff, you're going to be reinforced. You're not going to be critical about all this stuff. So we have a lot of people who are not going to be very critical about how Trump does. I'm not unfortunately going to be able to fit in national salads. I really wish I could. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Maxwell. And now we move back onto the side of the proposition. The motion, this House would elect Donald Trump. And we move to George to give a 5-minute speech.
Hey, you can hear me?
Yep, cool.
Okay, starting in 3, 2, 1. When I volunteered to speak in proposition to this motion, I wondered whether I could construct a coherent socialist case for the re-election of one Donald J. Trump. It would need to be revolutionary whilst remaining compassionate, and I thought it possible, because on an ideological level, Trump embodies many of the qualities the old left in this country also hold: anti-globalism, anti-liberalism, opposition to free trade, opposition to industrial decline, and an anti-establishment ethos which will stand up for workers against career politicians and multinational corporations. However, this will not be possible. Whilst he withdrew from NAFTA, he hasn't brought down American net imports. Whilst he declared a trade war on China, he then went and lost it. Whilst he said he was going to stand up for workers and jobs, he goes into this election with an unemployment rate of 8%, 3 points higher than when he entered office. Trump is not an effective socialist. There is no socialist case to be made. So, therefore, instead tonight, I am going to run an accelerationist case. The Democratic Party has failed us. The United States establishment has failed us. The American dream is dead, and we are gathered here to bury it. Accelerationism is the acceptance that we cannot effect lasting and social and economic revolution either through democratic means or through direct action. We therefore must think outside the box and act accordingly. The Democratic Party has failed, again, to open itself up to other modes of thinking, other methods of governing than neoliberal third-way bunkum. It has refused to nominate Senator Sanders twice now, and if Biden wins on Tuesday, then all hope is lost. We have long acknowledged that capitalism is its own worst enemy, so all we need to do now is sit back and watch and maybe crack open the marshmallows to toast on the open fires of American democracy. The acceleration of capitalism will result in the death of capitalism. A model which is built upon the premise of the continuous resource extraction and perpetual growth is inherently unstable and doomed to failure. This is because we live in a world of finite resources and an equal division of these resources and an equal division of the wealth that is assigned to them. Capitalism is flawed, capitalism is doomed, capitalism will fail, and the opposition want us to elect a capitalist neoliberal continuity candidate rather than someone who, as Zizek puts it in 2016, is willing to disturb consensus and will set new processes in motion. If this House were to re-elect Trump, someone who has and will disrupt the status quo, then it will make it much easier for progressives to rebuild something better out of the ashes. This is because we have brought down the establishment once and for all, and we can remake what remains in our image, as socialist, as progressive, as free from the old order, both economically and socially. A Democratic Party who lose again to Trump will be forced to reckon with the fact that they made the same mistake twice in nominating continuity candidates who offer nothing new, nothing radical, nothing of substance that speaks to the deep-seated disenchantment and malaise people have with this individualistic Western liberal democracy. Marx himself in 1848 noted that free trade systems are destructive, pitting proletariat against bourgeoisie in the extremes, and it is destructive to the point where it destroys itself. Marx says, in a word, the free trade system hastens the social revolution. Now, whilst I said Trump is opposed to free trade, that is only on ideological bases, not a practical one. In practice, he has done nothing substantial to reverse or bring down the neoliberal agenda. Moreover, in shifting the Republican Party rightwards by his tone and horrendous rhetoric, he's allowed libertarian capitalist champions into the highest level of governments. This is both in Congress, e.g. far-right businessman Senator Kenny Loeffler, and in the cabinet, Rex Tillerson, Secretary of State and CEO of ExxonMobil. 4 more years of a Trump presidency would be 4 more years of free trade accelerating and the Republican Party imploding. This is a good thing for us as anti-capitalists, as a Biden victory would restore the status quo and affirm the Democratic establishment's belief that nothing is wrong with the current system. Rather than placing radical socialist politicians like Sanders or Warren or AOC in the White House, the Democratic Party would see that traditional neoliberal capitalist Democrats are still capable of winning the presidency. So, if Trump wins, the Republican Party continues to explode. This is good for socialists and progressive because it removes the largest major obstacle to restructuring economy, society, etc., a coherent opposition at the level of government. And to allow socialists to push the Democratic Party further leftwards, as there is no opposition to stop us. The Democrats won't need to worry about winning middle ground because no minor party can come close to rivaling their size, for decades at least. Whilst the wealthy lobbyists and bankers who fund the Republican Party will still exist, they'll no longer have a single right-wing capitalist party to coalesce around, and as I'll show, they'll be dealt with by my second impact. A Trump victory on Tuesday would bring down the capitalist system itself in America once and for all. Trump will do something that Eugene V. Debs, Cesar Chavez, Bernie Sanders were never able to do, to bring it down and leave it rotting in the dust where it belongs. Without a functioning capitalist economy that allows Wall Street to steal and plunder our natural resources, without a Republican Party to protect them and act as their proxy in government, the rich ruling classes will fall. Things fall apart. The centre cannot hold. We must embrace that. We must go forward with that in mind, and we must accelerate it. That's how we win, not by going back to the status quo, not by voting for centrists who cannot hold, but by pushing on towards something better that we can build back from the ashes. Let's push forward. Re-elect Trump. I propose.
An interesting take. Thank you very much, George, for that speech. And now we move on to the opposition side of the argument with Robert. So we'll give you 5 minutes when you're ready, Robert.
Okay, firstly, can I say, George, that was, I love it. But also you are wrong, because accelerationism, A, won't work because the capitalist ruling classes entrenched so much in the power structures that they'll try and maintain it through any means, including trying to invest their large amounts of money into continuing to do it. So we think that it's not actually going to give a systematic way without a political revolution. And as we've shown through the analysis for my partner, the political resolution isn't going to happen because Trump is implementing secret police. So yeah, that kind of falls apart. Sorry. Anyway, on to my points. I'm going to talk about democracy, and then I'm going to talk about how he is bad at being president, and there will be a small tangent on Amy Coney Barrett, and then I'm going to also mention the alternate policies of Biden when it comes to the economy and why those are better. So firstly, tackling democracy. We think that Trump will undermine democracy. We think that Trump at the moment is currently trying to do this. He's talking about election voter fraud, mail-in voter fraud, dead people voting, all these things, which are objectively not happening by the measures of the independent organizations within the government that try and measure these things. And we think he's doing this to try and undermine the idea that he could lose the election legitimately, which is in itself dangerous. But we think there's a second point here. And we think that Trump is a criminal, and that he would face criminal prosecution were he to lose the executive immunity that is allowed by him being president of the United States. So we think that he has a strong incentive to not leave the presidency and to get in a supporter afterwards. And we also see that being in power in America allows you to try and rig the election. You can do this through implementing voter ID measures, disenfranchising criminals, and then imprisoning more people, things like this. And these are things that specifically target both ethnic minorities and people in low-income backgrounds, right? And these people like more prominently vote for Americans. Also, if we're assuming that Trump wins this election, that means that he also wins important swing states such as Montana, Missouri and West Virginia. And these places currently have governor elections going on. And so we expect that if Trump wins them, the governor will swing Republican. And we know that governors having a legislature within the state, in a swing state, gets to then draw the boundaries for that state and try and gerrymander and get more control that way. So we think that having another year of Trump gives him more opportunities to try and wrangle these things, which he will try to do to get him and his supporters on there into power indefinitely, so that he can try and avoid prosecution and also keep on stealing money, because he is broke. So yeah, this undermines American democracy generally. So like when the guy goes and talks about freedom, bullshit. Trump doesn't want you to be able to vote. He explicitly tells people not to vote. He tries to undermine their confidence in the election because he knows the more people vote, the less likely he is to win. Secondly, we think that Trump is bad at being president and therefore shouldn't be president. Look at the coronavirus response. And this is going to be the most extreme example, right? Trump has underplayed the coronavirus from day one. He has failed to implement legal social distancing measures. He has peddled conspiracy theories that about how to cure it, that make people think that they are virtually invulnerable from it. And he's like downplayed the strength of it when he's in. What does this mean? This means that he is incentivizing people to not follow safety measures, to not wear masks, to not social distance, to keep on going out. That means that more people get the virus, and when people get this virus, they fucking die, right? Like, he is actively killing people for political gain through this. Furthermore, he doesn't bother reading his intelligence reports. They need to make it colorful, include his name so you can read it. He keeps increasing tariffs, and we've seen that doesn't work. And he nominated Amy Coney Barrett, a person who could not tell you what the First Amendment was accurately within her hearing, and who thinks that the US Constitution should be interpreted as it was written, which is to say, with the eyes of someone 200 years ago who thinks that slavery is fine. Okay, and finally, on a point on the economics, like we talked, economics was brought up and it was said that Trump was good for the economy. This is not true. Why? Because the time that America was strongest economically was directly after World War II and the New Deal. These were massive investments of government funding into the economy, right? And which side of this thing proposes massive investments of government money into the economy? Biden, who has taken on at least some of the Green New Deal ideas from the left of the Democratic Party. And these ideas will spur green industries that will keep going instead of the old dead coal industries that are destined to fail that Trump supports. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Robert, for that speech on the side of opposition. Now we move back for the final time to proposition. So it's Zach is there.
Hello.
Hi, Zach. So we'll give you 5 minutes whenever you're ready.
All right, I just wanted to start off briefly with a few little statistics, just objective statistics rather than disputable ones. Unemployment has hit 4% before the pandemic, which is the lowest it has been in the Obama years. Wages hit $30 per hour with inflation rates, which is again higher than the Obama years. Poverty is reduced from around 15% to 10.5%, and in 2012, Barack Obama deported 400,000 migrants. The most Trump's done in his whole presidency is 270,000, considerably less. So the main thing I want to talk about today is potential. Okay, the potential for Trump to do good, to do bad, to do anything essentially. So a lot of people said in the last election, Trump will cause World War III with Putin, with the Middle East, whoever. He's violent, he's arrogant, he's a pig, he's not fit to be a president because he could cause World War III. Has he done that? No. Did he come close? Well, the whole assassination of General Soleimani was up in the air a bit because a lot of people said, some people took the stance he shouldn't have done it because it could have caused war. Some people took the stance that he just shouldn't have done it at all. Looking at Soleimani himself, he was extremely, extremely racist, very anti-Semitic. He didn't believe Jews were people. He'd been in his position for a very long time. And if you took someone like the leader of the Royal Air Force or the Army in Great Britain, no POIs. Took someone as a military leader in Britain. If they said anything slightly, I don't know, anti-Semitic or racist, straight away they'd be off the chart. They'd be in the papers. They'd probably be decommissioned or even stripped of their title. So if someone, an Iranian general leader, to be in a position since 1998, that says quite a lot about the Iranian almost autocracy as a whole in itself. And that links me on to the next point about Trump's travel ban introduced. A lot of people said it's based on racism. You want to argue that, fair play, argue that. But essentially, at General Soleimani's funeral, members of the public, just people who were not officials, just random Iranians, were shouting "Death to America, death to Israel." And Trump wants to say, and it's not to say that all Iranians and all the rest of the people from the travel ban and the Muslims believe it. Of course, it's not. You know, we're not saying that. But if you have a culture where it's politically, it's just kind of normal to shout "Death to America, death to Israel" in the streets, and you have a general who has not been removed from position for 22 years despite extreme amounts of anti-Semitism, because that's just okay over there. That is why Donald Trump has implemented the travel ban, because he wants to stop. Yeah, he may be stopping okay Iranians or people who just do not have those beliefs, but there is not even a majority. I don't know statistics of it. I haven't gone around and asked every Iranian or every Palestinian or Libyan, etc. But as a whole, when you have a culture when that is acceptable and that is okay, Trump is saying we don't want people to come over and potentially cause harm. Yeah, there'd be a lot of people that wouldn't cause harm. I absolutely agree with that, but like, there is definitely a potential there for risk, and that is why Trump initiated the travel ban as a whole. So, all concluding points. So we've heard a bit about some of the things Trump said, some of the things he's trying to do. I think there's definitely a principle of induction there, in that when we say Trump is trying to kill people, well, that could be a reason for his motivation, or that could be his motivation for what he's doing. I'm not saying it's not saying it is, but at the end of the day, yeah, we don't really know that, essentially. You know, Trump wants to implement various things, various strategies. That's fine, he can go and do that. But we shouldn't really say he is doing this to win the election, doing this to rig the election, because at the end of the day, what do we know about why he's doing it? We all have individual motivations, and no such thing as true altruism, or the opposite, in fact. So at the end of the day, a lot of people will conclude that Trump is doing things for his own interest, for his money, for his position, for the papers, and I'm not saying he is, not saying he isn't, but at the end of the day, I don't think we should fundamentally say he is doing this because he is racist, etc. And just a quick note on the race riots again in America. One of the main pushes of that, or the movement, was that it's not a new problem. It's been fundamental. The racism in the police force has been fundamental to America for absolutely decades on end, maybe even centuries. I very much doubt if Trump had lost the election to Hillary Clinton, or anyone else, in fact, there would have been any difference. Yeah, he's tweeted a few things. He's said a few things brushed on social media, but it's social media. Like, he's not, yeah, that might be his opinion, that might be his thoughts, but he's not implemented anything to law. To tweet something quickly and to implement something to law are two different things. So that's my concluding remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zach, for concluding the side of proposition. And now we move back onto opposition with Ethan. Ethan. To give 5 minutes. Yes. So we'll begin when you're ready.
Okay. I'm so sorry. Thank you. Just a quick few rebuttals. Of course, it's I can't remember which speaker on the other side said, what did Obama do? Well, I think clearly the strongest the best example of what Obama did was with Obamacare, in that he brought healthcare effectively. It wasn't a perfect system by no means, but he brought healthcare to millions of low-income Americans. And just a quick point on the last thing that was said, that Trump tweets a lot, but he hasn't really implemented anything. Well, in terms of climate change, when he's previously tweeted that it's a hoax made up by the Chinese, and I'll go more into this later, he has implemented that, because one, he's withdrawn out of the Paris Agreement, and two, he's brought in a lot of deregulation, which is clearly a severe threat to the environment. So just to run through some previous points. Of course, it's been pointed out that he's a threat to democracy. And of course, lest we forget, he called the press the enemy of the people, which is the language of authoritarian leaders. He stoked divisions from the very start of his campaign with the comments about Mexican immigrants and the Muslim ban, all the way to after George Floyd, really with a terrible response, horrific rhetoric. And instead of striking conciliatory tone and recognizing, institutional racism in America, what did he do? He sent in the military. And he sent in the military to what were largely peaceful protests. Yes, there was some violence, but on the whole, the vast majority of protests were peaceful. And of course, again, it was pointed out earlier, just for a photo op, he used tear gas on protesters. And very rightly, he was called out about that. Of course, the next point is in terms of the long-term damage that he's doing in terms of the environment. This is clearly, as I said, he said that climate change was a Chinese hoax, and he's very much acted on that. And clearly, I'd argue that his climate change policy is perhaps his most dangerous thing. Clearly, that's the most existential threat that we face today. And just about every other country in the world is part of the Paris Agreement. Maybe they're not all completely honoring it, but at least all of them have, completely agreed to it. Yeah, thank you, Josh. So every other country, I think, aside from Syria, is in the Paris Climate Agreement, right? But Trump withdrew the US, the strongest country in the world. And that sent a signal that he wasn't going to make an effort and he wasn't going to take it seriously. And clearly we have a president who doesn't recognize science. And indeed, on the topic of, ignoring science, we only need to look at the coronavirus. Of course, it's got a terrible response. We've got 8.85 million cases. You've got 227,000 deaths, and that's going up. Of course, he's repeatedly attacked scientists. He suggested, he was injecting disinfectant. Of course, there was a leaked tape where he attacked Dr. Fauci, and very rightly, he was called out on that because, of course, that was the public health expert who was trying to give good advice to Americans, and then Trump is effectively publicly undermining him. And again, of course, there's a lot of confused messaging, a lot of bad advice, a lot of conspiracy theories, but really a rejection of science, both on climate change and with the coronavirus, and just an absolutely an appalling lack of leadership. Of course, I'm sure as it's been mentioned that he's got a big habit of lying. An interesting fact is the Washington Post recorded as of the 9th of July, he's made 20,000 misleading or false claims, which is, I think, a record. I don't quote me on that. I'm not sure. And the last point I'd like to make, as I'm sure it's been brought up, is on the corruption and in terms of how he's run his operation. So more than 8 of his staff or senior team, whether that was Roger Stone, Steve Bannon, Paul Manafort, Michael Cohen, a large number of his staff and senior staff have been convicted mostly of fraud charges or lying to the FBI. And a pattern has emerged of a clearly corrupt administration. And indeed, one, I think, an important quote is in terms of Michael Cohen's testimony to Congress when he said, I know what Mr. Trump is. He's a racist, he's a con man, and he's a cheat. And of course, that's Michael Cohen, the lawyer who represented him for over a decade. Come on, don't come up with that. Hunter Biden is a ridiculous conspiracy. And I guess in terms of what Biden can bring, Biden's got a plan to tackle climate change. He at least accepts the science. He's ready to reach a conciliatory tone with the protests. He's got a plan for economic recovery. And I beg you to oppose the motion.
Thank you very much, Ethan. Now that is the end of the floor debate for the evening, and now we move on to the table debate for the evening. Now we move on to the floor speeches. So these are 3 minutes in length. We'll go in the order of proposition speech, opposition speech, and abstention speech. An abstention is neither for or against, or just a comment about how the debate has gone in general. These are 3 minutes. I'll message you when you have 1 minute left and 10 seconds left. They don't have to be 3 minutes. They can just be a statement long, or they can be a full speech if you want to. So we'll start with proposition. If anyone wants to give a speech in proposition to the motion, this House would re-elect Donald Trump. Derek? Okay, Derek, I'll give you 3 minutes when you're ready.
Right. So I was in Debater 4 years ago in 2016, arguing in favor of Donald Trump. I was right then, and I think I'm right now, because all we get from the Joe Biden side is a very negative case against Trump. There isn't a positive argument to vote for Joe Biden. The opposition have not come up with any good reason. Indeed, one of my fellow proposition speakers was against Biden because he wasn't left-wing enough. So the Biden campaign has really struggled to get people to turn up to rallies. Joe Biden and even Kamala Harris can't pull off a good turnout the way Trump can. They had to wheel out Barack Obama from retirement the other day in order to actually get people to listen to the message of the Joe Biden campaign. Joe Biden himself is not cognitively capable of being president, I don't think. He's called Donald Trump George Bush. He's said he was in the Senate for 180 years, and so he must have been there at the Gettysburg Address with Abraham Lincoln. And he also has said some quite racist things, such as he said back in May, "I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether or not to vote for me or Trump, then you ain't black." So he's saying that black voters essentially have to vote for him and not Trump. So I hardly would say that that's anti-racist. And indeed, if Donald Trump said something like that, there would be riots. Can you also imagine if Donald Trump Jr. Got a job in a oil and gas firm and used his influence with his father in order to get tax breaks and other kinds of privileges, then what do you think the reaction would be? Finally, I would say that a man like Joe Biden is not capable of putting his finger on the nuclear button, because I'm not sure he would know what it did. And as for Britain, well, we're trying to get a trade deal with the United States. We've left the EU, and Biden has said that he will not give us a trade deal if we don't have a deal with the EU. So from our own interests, it is in our interest to vote for Trump. And finally, I'll say something on the Paris deal. The Paris deal would have seen billions of US taxpayers' dollars sent to Eastern countries. Donald Trump withdrew for similar reasons that we withdrew from the EU, because we're doing it in our own national interests. So he was putting the American interests first, and he will continue to do that if he is re-elected. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Derek, for that. We want to opposition. So anyone wants to give a floor speech in opposition to the motion, this House would re-elect Donald Trump? Raise your hand or message in the chat. Josh?
Yeah. Thank you.
Josh, I'll give you a 3-minute timer, starting whenever you're ready.
Sure. We can start now. So just a disclaimer, I'm an American, so I have a bit closer of a perspective on this. And I did cast my vote last week or about a month ago. And when examining a candidate, I think there's a lot of views you have to consider. You know, their policies, their personality, their motivation, corruption, those sort of things. But I think for me personally, there's one thing that kind of serves as an automatic disqualifier, and that's someone's character. And I think that's because the character of those who lead us is the character of the nation. So you can kind of see that even in the last few years in America, for example, once Trump started running and kind of spewing this anti-immigration, just this kind of bigoted language, hate crimes increased in the United States substantially. And, clearly that is an effect of his presidency, and we look at different examples in the last 4 years. There was the meeting where he famously said that immigrants from Norway were more welcome than immigrants from African countries or Haiti. Or there was that rally multiple times where he led his supporters in chanting that 4 Democratic congresswomen of color, 3 of whom were born here in the United States, should go back to their countries because they wanted to tell us how to run ours. And I mean, that's just abhorrent in of itself. And just furthermore, you look at the coronavirus, the way that's been handled, instead of having a clear strategy from the beginning, he just made up names for it, like the Chinese virus and other things I'm not going to repeat. But I mean, it's clear that his views have impacted his responsibilities as president. So I just don't think we want that as Americans. We should, well, as people of this house, I guess we could say. You know, we deserve better. The American people deserve better. Not only this, but President Trump routinely makes fun of his opponents. He demeans what they say, how they look. He pushes foreign disinformation. He even has asked countries like Ukraine to investigate his rivals for no reason that's based in reality. And I just, I think it's pretty clear. This is the words of was a never Trumper, conservative writer, who recently said in a debate that the American people elected Trump to hate for them. And that's just really sad. So I think there's no justification for Trump based on his character. Joe Biden is a man of faith. He's worked hard for people around the world for his entire career. So that's why I am in opposition of the motion to re-elect Donald.
Thank you very much for that, Josh. That's the first opposition speech from the floor. Now we move to abstention. This is neither a for or against, or just a comment how the debate's gone. You raise a hand or message the chat now. Now we'll move back on to opposition speech. If anyone's got Helen, yes, sure. We'll give you 3 minutes starting from whenever you are ready.
Can everyone hear me? Excellent. Right, I'm going to start with some debate stuff because Derek doesn't know how debating works. The motion that we are debating under is this House would re-elect Trump. It is not the burden of the opposition to prove that Biden is a better choice. It is to prove that Trump is not a good choice, right? So that point is irrelevant. Also, one of the speakers said, we don't know that Trump's trying to kill people. I know that the bar is so low for this presidential election that snails get over it without a problem. But I personally think that we should give more of a high standard to, can we tell if someone's intentions is to kill their own citizens? But, you know, maybe that's just my opinion. We had someone tell us he didn't implement his tweets. I'm sorry, he tweeted he was going to ban transgender people from the military and then did it, right? This man does not fuck around with like what he's saying he's going to do on Twitter. Furthermore, people have brought up Black Lives Matter a lot. I would like to point out that when you throw around dog whistles like law and order in the context of Black Lives Matter, what you're actually saying is, let's maintain the status quo. The status quo where Black people are killed on the street regularly. That is not a status quo I want to uphold. And so, like, it's also, like, racist to say that, you know, that Black Lives Matter is thuggery and that MLK was, like, a beacon of civil rights movements when MLK was beaten and portrayed as a terrorist, and the idea that, like, oh, it's just, it's don't say that Black people are thugs. It's racist. It's bad. Okay. So I want to talk about LGBT and women's rights because that's kind of like where I specialize when it comes to debating. So Trump has been accused of sexual assault by at least 26 people. Biden has not been accused of sexual assault by 26 people. Only one candidate has their name in Jeffrey Epstein's Little Black Book, and it's not Biden. Furthermore, he literally nominated and got confirmed Amy Coney Barrett, shitting on the legacy of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a woman who is not in favor of access to abortion, which means that if she takes it away, which she is likely to, you will have thousands of women dying in unsafe abortions. Also, LGBT rights. He stripped back protections for trans people throughout his entire 4-year term. He has consistently said homophobic things. He is like, all of his administration officials are homophobic, and he has been shown very clearly that he does not think that protections on the basis of gender extend to trans people. So if you are a woman, or are an LGBT person, or are a person of color, or you happen to know any of these people, morally, you cannot be in favor of re-electing Donald Trump. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Helen, for that opposition speech. Now we move back onto abstention, which can be either a for or against, or just a comment in neutrality. If not, we'll move back for one final round of proposition, opposition, abstention. So are there any prop speeches anybody wants to make? No? Okay. Are there any more opposition speeches for the motion? John? Yeah, hiya. Right, we'll give you You want to unmute yourself, and we'll give you 3 minutes from whenever you are ready.
Yeah. All right, I'm ready. So I'm trying to respond to Derek's points. I'm also going to go into some of my points, but here we go. So you mentioned the Joe Biden rallies, that he did not draw a consistent crowd. He couldn't get a crowd. Well, that is actually because he wants to follow social distancing rules by the scientists, while Trump flouts the rules and puts countless lives of people in danger. Okay. So then you also said that Biden did not have the cognitive function to be president. While Trump is actually, Trump and Biden are almost the same age, and no documents show and either of them to be, incapable of, cognitively. So we can't make an assumption based on evidence that we don't have. You talked about Hunter Biden benefiting from the presidency of, the vice presidency of his father. Well, I can also say that Trump has put many of his family and friends in power alongside him. Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner. I can list countless more people. You also said that you would not trust Biden with the nuclear button, but I would ask, why would you trust Trump with the button? He's constantly showed erratic behavior and he's even called Kim Jong-un Rocket Man. That's not the kind of language I want to hear from someone who possesses the code. He also, as Helen mentioned, has sexual assault allegations by 26 women and has bragged about the obscene things he has done to them on tape. I don't think anyone should support that. He's also downplayed the coronavirus, as we've seen, which has led to countless deaths. And this is the one that topped it all. In a press conference, he said that he would not commit to a peaceful transfer of power. He said he would, if we take away the ballots, if we take away the votes, there will be no transition. How can anyone who's in favor of democracy vote for this man? He is undermining democracy and undermining this election. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that speech, John. And now we move to the final abstention speech of the night. No? Okay, so now we'll move on to the vote. This will be, I'll go once, and it will be everyone in proposition for the motion to raise their hand or write in the side chat or put their hands up. Is that okay? Okay, cool. So all those in favour of the motion, this House would re-elect Donald Trump, please raise their hands now or put a message in the chat. So we got. Okay, thank you very much. And now we move on to, now we move on to everybody in opposition to the motion. This House would re-elect Donald Trump.
So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. So with 3 to 9, this motion does not pass. This House would not re-elect Donald Trump. Thank you very much to everybody for partaking tonight. It's been a really good debate. With that, thank you very much for everybody for showing up today, and we'll see you all next week. Thank you.
Thanks for hosting.
Thanks for coming along. Yeah. Cheers.